Hello everyone and welcome to Sessions by the Herb Life. If you've been following along our experimental podcast format, you'll know that Sessions is a weekly podcast that brings you a new set of hosts every single episode to discuss everything cannabis. Our aim is to highlight the efforts of mostly women, but everyone really, living, working or playing in the cannabis arena, while also giving you a direct line into the conversations that are changing the landscape as we know it. Today is a super special episode because it is, of course, the finale for season 1 of the show. And by a happy coincidence, this episode, we pay tribute to British Columbia, a place where cannabis came to thrive. For those of you new to Sessions, my name is Tiana and I like to describe myself as the Sessions facilitator. Bringing people together is my game and I'm eternally grateful to have had the opportunity to connect with the pioneers of the evolving cannabis landscape. But more importantly, through this show, I get to contribute to what I hope is the shifting perceptions around a plant that has been demonized unnecessarily for far too long. Sowing the seeds of cannabis wisdom throughout Canada and abroad was not quite what I had planned. Mostly because I never had the foresight to predict that we would one day be in a situation where a career in cannabis would ever be a reality. But as fate would have it, I set my sights on Canada to work as a producer, and the rest is kind of history. So like my guests today, I am eternally grateful that by a roll of the dice, I happened to move to what is arguably the most cannabis-friendly place in the world. If you're into cannabis, undoubtedly you would have heard of BC Bud. It's known around the world as top quality cannabis, a reputation I imagine that puts some pressure on BC-based growers. So how do BC producers live up to this gold standard? Well, join us this session as we welcome Dan Sutton, CEO of Tantalus Labs, a British Columbia-based licensed producer of sun-grown, small-batch, long-flowered, slow-dried cannabis. Doesn't that just sound delicious? Raised in BC, Dan brings into his work the essence of the West Coast with a deep respect for the nature around us and a desire to make use of the natural resources in all facets of the growing process. The Tantalus Labs facility is purpose-built to aid in their sun-grown cultivation methods, which combines the use of state-of-the-art technology and the latest in scientific advancements with traditional practices to produce high-quality cultivars. Their use of technology to harness environmental resources is ushering in an era of sustainable cannabis for a sustainable future, and it's one that will hopefully be replicated by many more to come. Dan might have CEO status and the gift of the gab to match, but he's probably the farthest thing from corporate as you can get in an LP. He speaks so highly of his team and has some really impressive words to say about supporting women in the cannabis arena. Today, Dan is joined by Siobhan McCarthy, founder of Blissful Alchemy, a Vancouver-based event space, which is also home to a number of infused workshops. From cannabis topicals and edibles to guided yoga and meditations, the mandate of Blissful Alchemy is not only to provide a safe and comfortable space for people to engage with the plant, but also to engage with the community. Utilizing Siobhan's extensive experience in cannabis formulation, the workshops are designed with sustainability in mind, including locally sourced ingredients and often incorporating multiple uses of the plant through the cooking process. Think leftover decarb cannabis-infused chai. The cannabis industry, as we know it today, was built on a collective passion for a plant that has the potential to enrich both the physical and metaphysical facets of life. It's an industry that has been nurtured by this plant's devotees, who are often gifted with valuable insight by this incredible plant teacher. This session delves into the mosaic of cannabis science, plant devotion, and intelligent curiosity with two of the cannabis plant's most ardent supporters. Speaking of supporters, Sessions is of course made possible by the help of our sponsors. Icaria, CBD oil designed for you. Icaria has a wide variety of oils for you and your pets too. Take charge of your self-care routine with Icaria's CBD oils and empower yourself to enjoy the life you deserve. Rainmaker, that is RNMKR, is Canada's leading cannabis communications agency, known for providing narrative creation, media relations, brand strategy, and advisory services to the most prominent brands in North America and overseas. Are you thinking of growing your own cannabis? Well, grow organically with Sonoma Seeds. You'll find the best cannabis strains from around the world at sonomaseeds.com. Hemper. It's the best 420 subscription service and online head shop. Their experts hand-pick 10 items every month to pack into your Hemper box, delivering $100 of value for only $29.99 right to your door. All boxes are shipped in plain packaging since Hemper values your privacy as much as their own. Visit hemper.co for more info. Now, before we get into the last sessions episode, I'd like to extend my sincerest thanks to every one of you listening to Sessions. Making a podcast takes a lot of time and effort. There's a lot of behind the scenes work that is done, and we particularly appreciate those who have taken their time to leave reviews, both positive and negative. Your feedback helps us shape the future of Sessions. Now, as you know, we have been running a competition this season, giving away a number of Herbalife magazines, and the time has come to award the grand prize, a PAX vaporizer, to one lucky winner. So I'll have a drum roll, please. Congratulations to Fickle Philosophy. You've just won a very cool PAX vaporizer. It's the first prize I've ever given away. In the meantime, while we're herding the next lot of great cannabis hosts for Season 2, you can find tons of great content on the Herbalife website. Make sure you sign up to the newsletter where we'll be posting upcoming news about Sessions Season 2 and follow us on whichever social channels we have in common. Without further ado, I'll pass it over to Siobhan and Dan.
Hello, and welcome to the Herbalife Sessions. I am so very, very excited to be here this afternoon. I am Siobhan McCarthy, and I am the CEO and founder of Blissful Alchemy. And I am over the moon excited to have the amazing Dan Sutton from Tantalus Labs as our guest today. Hi, Dan.
Hi, Siobhan. Really glad to be here. Thanks so much for the opportunity to chat with you and your listeners.
Absolutely. I am over the moon excited to have you on board. I have really been watching your company for quite some time and seeing how you are iterating and evolving and growing. And so if you could maybe introduce yourself to our listeners who might not know you or Tantalus Labs, can you just give us a quick rundown?
Sure. My name is Dan Sutton. I'm the CEO and founder of Tantalus Labs. We're a greenhouse cultivator of medical cannabis and recreational cannabis, and we live in the Fraser Valley in beautiful Maple Ridge, BC, where we've purpose-built this glorious 75,000 square foot purpose-built cannabis greenhouse. We designed it for about 2 years before we ever put shovels in the ground, and in it we grow sun-grown, small batch, long-flowered, slow-dried cannabis that we hope represents some quality product in the British Columbia marketplace.
Fantastic. And so how did you originally come to cannabis?
Well, cannabis has been a part of my life probably since my early teens. I'm a Vancouver boy born and raised, and as a result, it was just sort of culturally relevant as we were going out and experimenting and exploring different ways to alter your mind. And so I think that my relationship with cannabis really deepened when I was at UVic, playing sports there and studying economics, and just found it to be such an awesome mitigator of the inevitable stresses that come along with university life. And also there's some pretty amazing cannabis in South Vancouver Island, like perhaps the best in the world. And so it was really great for me to get an education, not only in the use case of THC and other cannabinoids, but also, what's good and what quality cannabis really comes to represent. So I think it's sort of always been a part of my life, for as long as I can remember, and having such a strong culture with it here. Even if you weren't a cannabis user in Vancouver or in Victoria, you probably got a pretty good education in what good quality cannabis is anyway, because it's really, we're lucky to live in one of the most liberal places in the world around cannabis stigma and sort of treating it as an important part of a lot of people's day-to-day lives.
Absolutely. I think we're kind of spoiled. I almost feel like at my household, there's the salt, there's the pepper, there's the cannabis. It's just kind of part of our daily and how it's around and how I'm trying to educate my son about it in a responsible way. But I'm curious, what sports were you doing when you were at uni?
Okay, so I am a 15-year veteran of the rugby pitch. It was part of my British ancestry that my parents really encouraged me to get into that game, and I'm a big guy, and I enjoy a little runaround. So I played in high school and university. I played club rugby after university. We've won city championships together, and there's been a diversity of awesome interactions with that community, which is really strong in BC, and candidly is probably a pretty heavy cannabis using community in BC as well, for the inevitable aches and pains that come with not just what happens on the field, but what happens off the field too. I think there's probably some cannabis hangover treatment going on in the rugby culture, I don't mind saying. But I've also, always loved stuff like boxing and surfing and snowboarding. And, it's pretty hard to grow up here and not want to get out and get in the woods and get out in nature. So it's probably one small part of my sporting portfolio, which I'm always trying to augment.
That's awesome. I grew up on the side of a rugby pitch. My dad was a big part of the Toronto Saracens and then a big part of the Golden Oldies as he got older. My uncle runs a club in just outside of London. So I very much would see the incidents that would happen on the pitch and off of the pitch, and can really see how there could be a wonderful correlation of how cannabis could come to the rescue in many regards. It's interesting. I came to cannabis actually as a patient myself. I had been a 3-time national figure skating champion and then was hit by a car. And it was, ironically, it was a surgeon who recommended that I move over to using cannabis because the horrible pain medication they had me on just wasn't serving me. And it was really odd because I'd signed all these contracts as an athlete that I would never partake in cannabis, alcohol, or any other thing. I think it was one of the sports where, rugby, you're encouraged to drink, skating, not so much. So it was always interesting to me that I came to it from a medical point with a strong recommendation from a doctor, where before, in my experience, it was a total no-go zone. But I've been living out here for well over 20 years, and I feel very spoiled and fortunate to have been kind of reared in the wonderful world of BC bud. I think we are really, really lucky to be the connoisseurs that we are, because there's just so much beautiful history and the legacy of how cannabis has been such a great part of our community, I feel. So you said you also studied economics. Talk to me about this.
Yeah, so my academic background was economics. I will admit that I was never the most academic person. I think I probably carried to be average with as little work as possible to get through it. But towards the end of my degree, I really took a keen interest because, economic models are a really interesting way to evaluate a lot of different aspects of life in the world. And it kind of requires a deep insight into statistics and logic, and those aspects of that field of study really interested me. And I think that, it's a cool way to frame up how to make decisions with often limited data inputs. Like, you're never going to get perfect information, and economics teaches you to try to how to make the best possible decisions you can. But I graduated in 2008, which was probably the toughest time in the history of modern capitalism to try to get into the finance industry. And as a result, it forced me to take that thinking and apply it to other industries, innovation industries. I worked in nuclear power in the form of technology design for a few years with a really cool team of people that care a lot about clean energy. And then I worked in the supply chains for batteries, high field magnetics, in a similar context in the rare earth business. So yeah, economics was fun. I think that it's something that we should teach at least an introductory level in high school, because it kind of gets you thinking about the way people interact with each other in a market-based economy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, when we get into the finance aspect and we look at different LPs in Canada, you've chosen to stay private. You've not gone public. And do you mind speaking to that?
Sure. So, I'm not inherently opposed to public companies. I was involved with public companies when I was younger, in my early to mid 20s, and had some great success and then some frustrating failure. And the thing about it is, I think it can really encourage especially young companies to think in the really short term. And that's not really valuable at the beginning of a nascent industry where, it took 5 years for us to even get to a place where legalization was going to be a reality from the transition of commercial cultivation in the MMPR. And it's probably really going to take 5 more for us to see any semblance of market stability or, equilibrium. We're going to be in a growing market, here in Canada in a variety of contexts for the next 5 years. So the reason why we elected to stay private, as long as we have and in an ongoing way, although we're always kind of evaluating what our best costs of capital are and how we can best empower our team and potentially other teams and partners. So it's not a promise that we'll stay private forever. But I just wanted to be able to bring a semblance of stability around cash flows and